Have you heard the legend of a library sinking because the architect forgot to account for the weight of the books? It's been said about many libraries, the most notable of which is probably the Wells Library in United States. While this legend is just that, a legend, during this project I realized how easy it is to make such a problem yourself. Today we would talk about how I tried to solve a very common 3D printing problem but ended up tanking. Before we start, I would like to remind you that as always, I try to bring you original content on this channel. I try to create everything from scratch, be it the graphics, the animations, or even the music. So if you've been enjoying my content, please hit the like button for the algorithm and subscribe to not miss out future content. Hello, you absolute legends, and welcome back to Creating. In today's video, we are going to talk about one of 3D printing's most common problems, the spools. If any of you are not aware of what that means, 3D printing is a process where a 3D printer melts a filament and builds up an object layer by layer. Filaments come in spools, and once the filament is finished, you are still left with an empty spool. Now, they are technically recyclable, but depending on the brand of filament you use and the place you live in, it's not an ideal situation. I live in a remote village in the Himalayas. Actually, sidebar. I'm often confused when it comes to pronouncing words from my own language. Like Himalaya is what I would call it if I were speaking Hindi. In English, I'm never quite sure if I should just pronounce it as I would in my native tongue, since it's a name I've been speaking for almost my entire life, or should I pronounce it like a native English speaker would? Himalayas. Avatar is another such word. It's a Hindi word, we pronounce it avatar. And the word Himalayas does not feel weird to speak, but avatar, it does feel very uncomfortable to pronounce. So, I don't know, are you bilingual? Tell me what you would do in the comments. Now, back to the topic at hand. I live in a remote village in the Himalayas. Recycling almost doesn't even exist here. If it does, then there is no set procedure of where to drop the trash. Even in other places, it's not so simple. I'm leaving a very detailed video on the topic from the channel Out of Darts in the cards. You can click on the I button if you'd like to check it out. So I decided to take a crack at this problem, to find a solution where you can reuse an empty spool for something you can always use. The idea is simple. You turn the spool into a storage box where you can store your screws and Allen keys or other such doodads. It isn't a new idea by any means. It's been done many times already. But for all of those solutions, they suffer from one or more of the problems I'm going to enumerate in a second. Basically, think of it like this. If X number of people are willing to use your solution, let's say 2000, each of these problems would cut down on the number of people who would actually use it. Number one, if your solution is specific to a particular brand of filament, right away, you can write off 1000 people from this number. I made my solution parametric so that it would fit any spool, just enter the right measurements. Number two, the solution uses something non-printable like a long screw, which is very hard to source for people, even for me. So another 300 people would find it inconvenient and not use it. I made my design 100% 3D printable with the exception of the spool. Number three, floor space. I did not yet see a design that is stackable. If your design isn't stackable, you can have a very limited number of these spool storage boxes. I made my design very easily stackable and very convenient to access. If I have managed to solve all three of the problems, why does the video title still call it a fail? The more astute amongst you would have already realized this. It's because while trying to solve these three problems, I lost sight of my original goal. I had to minimize waste. The solution that I came up with consumes a lot of plastic, about 400 grams at 10% infill. That's like half a spool of filament in itself. If the goal is to minimize waste, this does not even come close to solving it. I got a little carried away in the design phase, and I did not realize how much plastic it would actually cost to manufacture. Now, all hope is still not lost. I do know of ways that we discuss in a minute that can help. But this is definitely not the perfect solution I was looking for. Before we discuss any improvements, it still does function fine as a storage box. And if all you want is to print these compartments without the rest of the assembly, it won't cost a lot of plastic either. I have said this before, the design is fully parametric. You can get the Fusion 360 file, the link is in the description, and you only have to measure your spool. Put in the measurements and the design would be ready for your particular spool. Now for a few alterations that might still help the design. Having 3 legs instead of 4, and that might actually make it more convenient to use too. And also, since the legs are not load bearing, most of the weight is supported by the cylinder in the middle. You can actually decrease the thickness of the legs and save some filament there. But despite all this, it's not going to be the solution I was hoping for, so I'm abandoning the project for the time being. If you would still like to print one for yourself, the link is in the description as always. It's available freely on Thingiverse, but if you'd like to support my efforts and content, you can get it for just $2 from my Etsy store. Here is the build for you. You might need to print things in multiple shifts. I printed everything at 0.3 mm layer height, and in the files I have included a set of sample 3MF files for the Prusa slicer. As you might have noticed by now, the problem of wasted spools still isn't solved. I guess we'd have to go about it the old-fashioned way. Ask your manufacturers to take back the spools and reuse them. Sure, you might get a slightly dinged spool the next time, but who cares? Buy bigger spools, maybe 2 or 5 kgs, or just find a manufacturer that sells loose filament. You can actually print a reusable spool for yourself. If you have any other ideas, you can mention them in the comments. And with that, we're at the end of yet another video. If you liked it, you know what to do. If you didn't, the other one is fine. Hit the subscribe button to not miss out future content. And if you'd like to see some of my builds and time lapses, follow my Instagram page, CreateInc01. And as always, just keep building.